Hello everyone, Christina here. Welcome to another video at my YouTube channel. This video was a direct request from one of the members at my premium membership here at YouTube. She asked specifically about the difference between blending with Distress Oxide inks versus blending with more traditional dye inks. So for today, I'm going to be showing some ink blending combos using oxides as well as inks from Concord and Ninth. I'm going to be trying to pick comparable ink colors so that we can really see the different ink combinations side by side and can talk about the differences between these two different formulations of ink. So this first combo, I started out with Tumble Glass Pine Needles and Chip Sapphire. I think if you're going for an ink blending combo, using colors that are very close to each other on the color wheel, I think works best. Also, you'll notice that I have a freshly inked ink pad or re-inked ink pad. That's because when you're doing ink blending, if you're using very dry ink pads, it's going to be difficult no matter what ink you're using. I'm moving on to Concord and Ninth, and I've chosen Harbor, Oceanside, and Midnight. Those are very comparable colors to the oxides. In fact, I think of all of the color combos I'm sharing today, this first one is the most direct comparison with colors, as far as having the colors look very, very similar and just the finishes look different. So I'm blending. You'll notice with the oxides, I was using some foam blending tools. Those are the domed blending tools from Ranger. And for the Concord and Ninth ink, I'm using blending brushes. These are from Simon Says Stamp. And these blending brushes work great for all of this. I prefer to use blending brushes with traditional dye inks. And with oxides, I tend to go for foam tools, but you could definitely use both. So here you can see the comparison of both of those. Notice how you can see the texture of the paper on the Concord and Ninth blend. Isn't that interesting? On the oxide one, you don't see the texture of the paper as much because of the nature of the ink. Oxides are almost a little bit like a hybrid ink. They're a little bit dye, a little bit pigment. And what we know about pigment inks is that the ink doesn't soak into the paper. It kind of sits on top. So you have this sort of layer of paint, kind of almost like an acrylic paint because it's opaque. And it just sits and kind of floats on top of the cardstock until it has dried enough that it really kind of soaks in and adheres. When you're using a dye ink, like the Concord and Ninth inks, it soaks into the paper immediately. It dyes the paper. Think of it that way. It dyes the paper. It soaks in. And so you don't have as much time to really get those colors kind of blending. With oxides, you have the opportunity to walk colors back. If you have one color that's particularly too strong, you can actually add another color on top and sort of walk that back. But you don't really have that opportunity with dye inks because it immediately soaks into the paper. So you're going to get really vibrant, saturated color with your dye inks, but it is slightly more challenging to get super smooth blends just because it does absorb immediately into that paper, as opposed to oxides where the ink kind of sits on top of the paper. Also, I find that using very juicy ink pads works best, whether it's an oxide blend or it's one of these Concord and Ninth blends. Either way, I think it works best to have very juicy ink pads. So here you go. Here's another comparison. You can kind of see the difference between the two. The oxide on the left is very, very smooth, and there is some smooth transition of color on the C9 ink side, but you do see that texture of the paper coming through a little bit more. And I've noticed that you really see the texture of the paper more when you have a very saturated ink application with dye inks. If you use a much lighter hand, it's not quite as noticeable. By the way, I'm using some, this is Neenah Classic Crest Solar White 80-pound cardstock. That's what I've used for all of my ink blending videos, so I didn't want to change that up. I'm using the same cardstock across all of these videos, and I've got many of those videos now. I'll link to my playlist down below if you want to see all of them. But all of the previous ink blending combo videos are using oxides. This is the first one where I'm using a different brand of ink, kind of in a comparison way. Of the 4 ink blending combos I'm sharing today, I think this one in both oxide and the C9 inks is my favorite. The Carved Pumpkin Picked Raspberry to Seedless Preserves. I think it's just so pretty, such a beautiful blend from that kind of more toned purple to an intense pink. Okay, so I've chosen Clementine for the orange shade with the C9 inks, and Clementine is not as bright of an orange as I would hope. But once you see it blended into dragon fruit, oh, I just loved it so much. That kind of intense red-orange shade you get where they overlap. So beautiful. I've never tried to blend these two together before, and I don't know that I would have ever tried it if it wasn't for challenging myself to use similar colors to what I use with my oxides. In fact, this blended out to just a white right here would be such a gorgeous blend. But I'm going to bring in Fig, which I think... Okay, dragon fruit and fig are probably my 2 most favorite colors of the additional inks that C9 added about a year ago. They're so beautiful and they're amazing blended together. So I'm actually going to go back and forth between dragon fruit and fig just until I get a little bit of a better blend here. I'm going back to dragon fruit right now, just to get those colors overlapping a little bit more smoothly. And then when I'm done, I'm finished with this beautiful blend. You can see how different those blends look. The oxide is so much more subdued in comparison. For my last ink blending combo for today, I started out with these 3 colors. I've sort of been trying to use like summer inspired ink blending combos, kind of like sunsets and the beach or the ocean or things like that. So for this one, I did Mustard Seed, Carved Pumpkin, and Blueprint Sketch. And this one came together really nicely. In fact, where the Blueprint Sketch and that Mustard Seed overlap, we're going to get a nice green shade. So this is where you most definitely get one of those bonus colors just by overlapping your colors. So yellow and blue are, when you mix them together, you get green. So this is a great way to really stretch out the amount of inks you use on your blending. I'm going to go back in with a little bit more of that mustard seed. The Blueprint Sketch is kind of taking over all of that yellow, so I went back to the yellow and added more on top. Like I mentioned previous, using oxide inks does give you the opportunity to kind of walk back some color blending. So for that orange shade, this time I'm once again using Clementine from Concord and Ninth. I've got Clementine, Buttercup, and Blueberry. And I didn't realize that I had brought down that Clementine so far until I started to get to this point. I'm like, oh no, there's really not much room for my blue shade that will, turn into green. So I knew that I would probably need to do a little bit of kind of a on-the-fly correction to this ink blending combo. So here's the original ink blend combo with just the 3 shades. But I'm actually going to bring in a 4th color. I'm going to bring in Poppy because that Clementine was taking up nearly half of the whole blending area. So I wanted to just even it out a little bit more. So I brought in the color Poppy. So this is ink combo 4B. I'm just adding it on. I'm adding a little bit of this red shade so I can get a nice blend. And this to me looks like a traditional kind of rainbow blend. I think those colors look really great. So I'm going to go back to my oxide blend and I'm going to add in a red shade as well. I'm going to add some Candied Apple up to the top of this one just to blend in a little bit of that red to get a more direct comparison for this last ink blending combo. So here are the last 2 ink blends. I think they look so great together, both for different things. Notice the difference just by using the Concord and Ninth inks. You can still get a smooth blend, but the saturation is just much brighter as opposed to using that oxide, which has sort of almost like a coating on it, like it just floats on top of the cardstock. All right, so here are all 4 of the ink combos using 2 different brands of ink. I've got this labeled image that I'll be sharing at Instagram as well. And the hashtag for these, I'm just updating my hashtag. Instead of Christina's Oxide Combos, I'm changing it to Christina's Ink Combos. So as I share more of these, hopefully in the near future, if you want to share these blends and what you make with them, you can share that over at Instagram. Thanks so much for watching today. I'll be back with another video very soon. Thanks for watching.